And before I properly introduce myself, I wish to observe a protocol of respect, because this territory, which includes Seattle and Renton and Redmond and Burien, that is all the ancestral territory of the Duwamish people. So I would like to honor their spirits here in this land. They were longhouse people, spiritually, and their oral traditions tell how they have been here since time immemorial, because their stories talk about the last ice age. Although Chief Seattle signed the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1885, those promises weren't kept. The incoming settler government took the land for themselves, and they burned down the Duwamish village and the longhouse. And they even passed Law Number 5, which criminalized the Duwamish for being in their homelands after dusk. But the Duwamish, although they're not recognized by the federal government yet, they still are resilient and keep their culture economically and spiritually and culturally. So I offer the Duwamish my respect today. Is there anybody here that is a descendant of a Duwamish person? Duwamish line? Okay, then I'll just proceed with respect for them. Since I've had the pleasure of visiting Radiant before, some of you are familiar with my name, 3 Stars. So I take time to introduce myself in a proper way, because kinship is so important. My name is Lenore 3 Stars. I was born on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. I'm Oglala, which is one of the 7 bands of the Great Sioux Nation in the history of Canada. My mother is here with me today, and she's in Toshu, another of the 7 bands from Cheyenne River Reservation. So this has been a good trip for us. It's her birthday this month. In Lakota culture, as in most indigenous cultures, kinship is fundamental. It's so important. It tells us how we relate to each other, to Creator Jesus, and to the rest of creation. So when people ask me where you're from, I say I'm from Pine Ridge, even though I live in Spokane, because they want to know how I'm related to the land. How am I related to Creator, to all creation? They want to know who my people are. So especially if it's a Native person, they say where you're from, I always say Pine Ridge. Even though I live in Spokane, they will know, many of them, that Pine Ridge means Oglala people. They will know that my ancestral territory is Kawasaki, which is the Black Hills, which is where Mount Rushmore is located. They will know that I have a relationship to that land. That's where our creation story lives. And the creation story for all different kinds of people is important. Everybody had one at one time. If you came over from Europe, you had one there. But that caused a trauma, I think, in the settlers' background when they had to cut themselves off from that and come over here. So still there's that empty spot seeking, because your creation story tells you who you are and where you come from, like the Hebrew creation story does. The Jewish people, they need to know who they are and where they come from. There's a theologian who is Cherokee and Osage. His name is George Tinker, and he wrote, "Native creation stories are our history of experiencing Christ as Creator, who communicated healing and salvation to all His creation." So I consider the Christian terms of redemption and of salvation to mean that healing that only Jesus can bring. As Creator, through whom all things were made and nothing was made without Him, right? Jesus was always, couldn't help but be everywhere present in His creation, working on His redemptive and healing purposes. So I offer all of this background to introduce you to the indigenous perspective that I'm bringing to the story of Rahab. When I decided to follow Jesus as an adult, my faith was formed in the Western tradition for a good many years. But it was inevitable that one day I would want to follow Jesus from the context of my own native culture. And I learned that there are deep differences between a Western European worldview, which came over here with the settlers, and indigenous worldview. The lens through which I view the world and my place in it, that's my worldview. So there's no culture-free gospel. We all have a worldview depending on where we come from. We all are on that spiritual journey. So a quick word about the use of the word story. When I was a child evangelism fellowship teacher, they trained me, don't use that word, story, because that sounds like you're not telling the truth, like the written word. And what that is Western culture looking down on the oral tradition. That devalues the epistemology of orality, because that tradition is found in just about every indigenous culture, including the Hebrew. Orality is not just talking, it's a system of knowledge, and it conveys history and culture and tradition over spans of time. And not just anybody could do it, it had to be the person appointed to do it, and he was able to do it. So orality preserved culture. And the New Testament was preserved in the oral tradition before it was written down. So we'll turn to the story of Rahab. And Chris, thank you so much for reading that whole story, but I really think we wanted to be in it. So the context of Joshua 2 is the conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua, who is a warrior from the tribe of Ephraim, who took his people into the promised land after wandering around with Moses for 40 years. So the first verse talks about, we'll just do a brief exegesis and then move on. But Joshua sent the first 2 spies into Jericho, and they went and entered the house of a prostitute or harlot, whose name was Rahab, and they spent the night there. Now Rahab's name in Hebrew means broad or large, connoting a vast expanse of land. And I think that refers to the fact that she lived in Canaan, which was the promised land. This text indicates no sense that the spies were doing a shameful thing, spending the night at Rahab's, although who knows. But it sounds like that's what a spy would do, right? Would go and seek information in a place where everybody hangs out. And of course her house was built into the wall, and that was strategic as well. But her brothel inn business was consistent with the Canaanite customs. That was a culture where women were consecrated into temple prostitution as part of their worship. So when we look back on stories, it's easy for us to make assumptions based on where we are now in our time and place on who they were then. We might assume that Rahab had moral and sexual boundaries that we have now, and she just chose to overstep them. Halley's handbook of the Bible even says that Rahab may not have been considered as bad as the word harlot now implies. Her profession was considered by the people among whom she lived as honorable and not disgraceful, as we think now. So if we think that way, then her brothel was a reasonable place to go and hang out with the locals and collect intel, right? And apparently everybody collected intel at Rahab's because somebody went and told the king that there were 2 spies there. So the king sent a message to Rahab and said, bring out those men. Verse 3. Well, I thought that was interesting that he sent a message to Rahab. I mean, he could have took all the king's men, right, and gone in there by force and brought out those spies. But he said, bring out those spies, Rahab, okay? But the woman, she took the 2 men and hid them. And she bald-faced liked the king and said, well, they left and I don't know where they went. And her word was accepted. They didn't go in to check. Rahab made a critical and risky decision to betray the king, her own Canaanite people, and her land. This was a huge decision from every perspective, culturally, socially, politically, personally. I have to say there was collusion. In spite of her social location, something made her think that she could make that decision. She had agency Maybe she'd been treated that way by her community. What made her think she could do that? Or was she even surprised by her own decision? Have you ever made a bold decision? Did I do that? Yeah. So the narrative goes on. Before the spies went to sleep, Rahab came up to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen upon us, and that all inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea, and how you utterly destroyed the 2 kings of the Amorites. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God indeed is God in heaven above and on earth below. These particular words of Rahab were very important. When the spies reported those words to Joshua, I'm sure he must have felt this deep thrill, because her words actually fulfilled the prophecy in Moses' song. Back in Exodus 15, after they had been miraculously rescued from Pharaoh, Moses sang a song, and the song predicted, all the inhabitants of Canaan will melt away. Fear and dread will fall on them by the greatness of your arm, just as Rahab had said. So Rahab struck a deal with the spies in exchange for her action of hesed, in exchange for her kindness of hiding them. The spies would spare her whole family when they conquered Jericho. They said, our lives for yours. And so she let them down the red rope and they escaped. The epilogue in chapter 6 is important because Joshua kept the promise that the spies had made. It says, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she dwelt in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers. The continuing narrative is significant because Rahab married a Hebrew man, Solomon, and he had a son, Boaz, right? And who did Boaz marry? Ruth. Yes, so she was Ruth's mother-in-law. Rahab took her place in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Matthew 1:17 follows all 42 generations from Abraham to Jesus on Joseph's side. And interestingly enough, when you look at Hebrews 11, where she is named in the Hall of Faith, they still call her Rahab the harlot. Why is that? So, okay, when Kim first asked me, would you like to come and hear the 4 women we're studying, I immediately chose Rahab. And I thought later, Rahab must have chose me because I had no idea why I chose Rahab. I struggled and I prayed and I wondered. But eventually, a couple of things did come out. Our theme verse, Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. A little bit different wording. Lakota culture teaches many values, but these 4 are especially taught: courage, generosity, fortitude, and wisdom. Our closest traditional allies are the Cheyenne, and they have long respected their Dog Soldier Warrior Society. I have a dear friend, and he comes from that line, so they still hold that dear. They're renowned for their courage to ceremoniously plant a place where they will stand and fight the enemy. They'll fight to their death for their people. A warrior will make a very fearless stand when there's no turning back. I've heard Jesus described as the first dog soldier who gave his life for the people. There was no turning back. He would choose to turn back on the cross. And of course I see image of fearless Native women. There's one sitting right there. There are stories of Native women who rode into battle alongside the men. They earned every feather in their eagle feather headdresses. And my own mother's grandmother, her Jenny leads on. She survived the Wounded Knee massacre. In the bitter winter of 1890, the U.S. Army turned their Gatling guns and killed about 300 men, women, and children. from my mother's tribe mostly, the mini, or band, the Mini Kosher. Unchi Jenny had a baby on her back as she was fleeing away on horseback, and that baby was shot and killed, and that's how she survived. So that means our ancestors were not meant to survive. I was not meant to be standing here. But Unchi Jenny rose and she faced the first generation of reservation life. And she raised a new generation of Lakota. So here we are. And to me, that's not passive resistance. To me, that is fearless resistance. So courage also extends beyond the physical aspect, such as making a decision and living by it. It's important to make the best decisions in a native context because you're making that decision for 7 generations. It's not what's good for you right now, but how is that going to affect 7 generations of relatives? I think Unchi Jenny had us in mind when she made that decision to persevere. It requires a depth of moral courage to take responsibility for your decisions. So it's good that we're offered the power of spirit, and love, and self-discipline. And it's up to us to act on that gift and use it. While this verse seems to chide us just a little bit, that for the spirit God gave us does not make us timid, like, oh, I could never be timid. I believe the point here is that it's more about action than feeling. Jesus told the chief priests and Jewish leaders this story about the 2 sons. And he told the first son, go work in the vineyard for me. And he said, no, I don't want to. And then he thought, oh, I feel bad about that. So he went and he did the work. And he asked the second son, go and work in the vineyard for me. And he goes, oh, sure. But he didn't go. So he said, which son did the will of his father? Well, the first one. Jesus was making a point that actions are louder than words or feelings. And at this point, grace is the story of Rahab because he went on to say, assuredly I say to you that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness and you did not believe him, but tax collectors and harlots believed. So Rahab was fearless in her action of faith. And her faith was counted as righteousness, just like Abraham. She had a new relationship with God. And relationship was the next theme that came to me because relationship gives meaning in our life. In Lakota, we call the earth Unchimaka, and that means grandmother earth. And that shows a deep respect and relationship to the earth because we consider ourselves as part of all creation, not over it, not above creation, but an interdependent connection, interconnected part of creation. In the Genesis story, who's created last? It's man. And I think that's because we're the most dependent on creation. In the Lakota philosophy of life is mitaku yeo yasi, and that means all my relations. And that's why I call them our relatives, because we're all related to each other, to Creator, God, and to all creation. We treat the animals as our relatives, the nature as our relatives. We have that kind of respect for it. And God promised Abraham, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And those, we call those in Lakota, we call those the 4 sacred directions. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. That is a worldview of relationship. It includes creation in a shalom relationship designed by Creator. That's our original design. And when there is a break in right relationship, harmony is broken. And it's our calling to come back into alignment with God's restoration and healing. And since indigenous spirituality is often tangible, then this restoration, the seeking of a right relationship often includes ceremony. Ceremony can take many forms. It could be inipi, which is 4 rounds of prayer and a sweat lodge. Inipi is Lakota for they are receiving life. But you're seeking that right relationship, restoration of that right relationship, because it gives meaning to your life. And you have seen dream catchers coming from China and be marketed as Indian spirituality. But without relationship, that's just an empty image. Mount Rushmore is just an empty image. That has no relationship to Lakota culture. Those were sacred lands, and that was a relationship. In the story of Ruth, you recall the Hebrew concept of the kinship redeemer, the relative who restores or preserves the right relationship of the disadvantaged family members or the oppressed or the poor. And that concept arises from God's covenant relationship with the Hebrew people. And it points to restoration in Jesus Christ, the kinsman redeemer of all. It's the worldview of relationship. So the more I considered Rahab from this point, this perspective, the more I despaired of making any kind of a positive point about relationship in Rahab, because it bothered me. It bothered me that Rahab broke relationship with her people. She broke relationship with her land. She broke relationship with her king. I mean, there was no meta-narrative then where she could know this is going to turn out just great. So it makes me think of Western history, where they like to hold up examples of Indians who they think embraced whiteness. They turned their backs on their people and embraced whiteness in favor of the colonizers. I mean, you see, you hear, as one example, Pocahontas. I mean, that story has been embellished so much to epic proportions that she is a heroine who saved the white explorers when she was really probably 12 or 13 years old, and her life was commandeered. She was kidnapped, and she was raped, and she was forced into marriage, and tradition holds that she was probably murdered when she was taken overseas. She wasn't needed anymore. So I struggled to reconcile Rahab with right relationship. It seemed that I would be arguing against the spirit who validated her by placing her in the lineage of Jesus. You don't want to be in that position. So then the still voice told me, Rahab is about right relationship and about broken relationship. The Rahab reality is that she was both. One difference between Western thinking and indigenous thinking is this duality, that it has to be one or the other. Western thinking, which is influenced by Greek civilization, is dualistic. So there's heaven and earth, and good and evil, spirit and matter. Indigenous thinking is more holistic. It can be both. Do you remember the fiddle on the roof when Kevia was hearing the arguments and heard one, oh yeah, you're right. And here's the other side, oh yeah, you're right too. It's that indigenous holistic thinking. Rahab was bold in many ways. She was fearless before spies and afraid of God. She was a victim and an overcomer. She was oppressed and an oppressor. She was a conniver and a family savior. And she was a harlot and a great Uchi in the line for Jesus. So what if the story of Rahab actually is the worst that it could be with no qualifications? She was a prostitute. She was a whore. She was a betrayer. She was a traitor. Let's assume it was as bad as it can get. I see this relating to the Me Too movement and the missing and murdered Indigenous women today. That's as bad as it can get. Native families are saying that when they try to report their women relatives as missing, the authorities are saying, oh, they're just out drunk, they're partying it, they're sleeping it off, don't worry about it. And they even tell the families that the missing woman is a whore. Undeserving of rights because they put themselves in harm's way. So in the age of unresolved intergenerational trauma, a girl could have grown up in such a dysfunctional way that trafficking is anticipated and accepted as a norm. Nobody wants to be missing and murdered. or go down in history as a harlot. So what is there for us then? Beyond the worst it can be, beyond the unresolved pain and trauma, beyond racism and all the isms that shatter God's perfect design for us, what is there for us beyond all shame and grief? There is shalom. There is healer Jesus. In the beginning, he provided a perfect community of creation, interconnected and interdependent. Each part of creation needs each other to live in harmony. And our rejection of that design has been almost violent, self-destructive. We continue to devastate Creator's original design for us, yet Creator continues to reveal love. We reject, Creator loves. Creator does not change. Jesus will return, bringing shalom, bringing the best to the worst. What does it say about the will of the Spirit that Rahab the harlot was embraced into the bloodline of Jesus, our healer? Jesus is saying, I have all power in heaven above and on earth, and this is how I choose to use it. I want to heal your Rahab reality. Rahab's broken relationship was actually part of Jesus' plan for restoration. For Rahab and for all creation, because the verse that God so loved the world, I don't think that's meant to be so anthropocentric, not just for humans. He created all creation. He died for all creation, and I think his resurrection means healing for all creation. So in closing, I want to pass on the words that a woman speaker said, is there something that God is asking you to do, but something is holding you back? Is that fear holding you back? If it is, do it afraid. Do it afraid. That's our Rahab reality. We can be afraid and fearless. So my relatives, go and do it afraid in power and love and self-discipline. I wanted to sing, I forgot my hand up, but I wanted to sing a song that would honor the fearless women. The song came out of this prison in Ontario, Canada. And that was a horrible prison. It was known for abuse and psychiatric experimentation on Native women. And this song was a way of staying alive, of supporting each other in that hell life, because many women lost their lives. We love you, Jesus. Amen. And thank you for the helpful response.